So I'm starting this other book that I bought in Canada, and this was bought on Amazon when I was trying to like find ways of like, I guess you could say it's just like a kind of like give it a bit more catering towards describing and yeah, describing their terminology, or like getting an idea of like what a proper chess book is in terms of like a conceptualization from strategies on be able to like what do you call it, visualize certain things in a more like language sense. Does that make sense? I always thought the description of like when someone takes in certain ways of describing this is a this thing, and I kind of like try to distinguish if they are talking in lines of like a reference in terms of terminology, not necessarily in lines of like what's the word I'm looking for. Not necessarily describing a tactic, but like in terms of like, I think they call this the root, the reti, or you know da. And on the internet, it can be kind of confluent, where you kind of like pull implications on meanings for certain openings, going through that experience and making the appreciation on the board, having because I when I started learning this game, right, the flexibility and conceptualization and theoretical theory chess to just like learning in a very structured manner and then being rigid into its solid foundation, gave me the impression of like appreciation of like just, it felt daunting just trying that out, especially when you know that it's an old game and has notoriety of a lot of things already existing. But like, I guess you could say like I built on it, and I loved it because I saw this also on other chess on a concept of trying to do something because I like a particular tactic, or I want to display something, which I see there was something really cute when you kind of talk about something I was exposed to in line of calling the honk the goose opening because of the honk honk. That was so good. But like the idea of like why you try to diploize figuring out on conceptualizing a concept for an opening was there was a certain strategy that I wanted to like depict, and I've kind of like put that in my own YouTube channel of like on that basis, starting out from its own variation, but like you know there's certain things I didn't go over analysis of it. Does that make sense? To make sure it's completely unique, as I've seen some other people do when they want to do, be expressive in correspondence to like influences that already kind of like start out in a form of connection in the kind of like unexpected coffee chess debate, if that makes sense. But like where I kind of like tippy-toed onwards is just like, now I'm at a point where there's certain things I would love to like depict a certain amount of sophisticated, like call it a bit of pause on describing things, and I thought I'd give it a try to like read strategy books. So I'm taking this book that I saw on Amazon from the international master Jeremy Silman, and I'd see how it's like consider reading it if I can go grasp certain things. There's definitely some things in terms of like decoding figurative in terms of imagining chess that we are coming overlap at a point where I am at, which was like, can I do memorization chess? Which in my mind says I feel confident that I can do it, having tried a few exercise. And again, it's definitely described on my YouTube channel. I just kind of like put that project down. I think it's just not strongly reinforced in my environment to like really keep playing chess in a manner that's like enjoying or showing that I'm better. Does that make sense? So like one of the feelings that's really really satisfying is showing that you're smarter than the other opponent by playing this game, because you're able to like recognize things and conceptualize good strategies or tactics. I kind of like finishing debriefing about this book, kind of like summarizing my intent of going into this book and what I hope to depict, because like I've done a bit of a expressive chess commentary, and it's likely that even on my own games, but like in the lines of where I had to stop because of circumstances where I wanted to push myself and get more adrenaline rush on my chess skills. So naturally I was going to put myself out there. I made an appreciation already from gravitating, talking about playing online chess to gravitating to playing real life chess in the pressure, especially when I thought I had a lot of like reputation at stake. Like if you practice something a long time, you have to play it. You have to show that to self-esteem. Externalize on a piece of the board game. Your mood switches off really quickly. But like I kind of like gravitated towards a bit more maturity and emotional regulation on this. It's kind of funny for my circumstances, but I'm not gonna really externalize that already because it's kind of like bad blood at this stage. But I thought I gotta like talk about this in externalization of this game, this book, as I'm trying. I want to conceptualize. So I don't know where I'm kind of really trying to direct myself. Chess is just a hobby for me. In a more externalized sense, I feel like I just do it for fun, and I don't really think more about it. But I got some time to spare in terms of circumstances for what I prioritize right now, and it's easy for me to like just add on and just do that while I'm waiting for other things to do, and think it's fun. I think I get the impression it was more fun for people to watch me play chess and interact in that way. So there may be options and projects where I kind of try to do that in the sake of correlation to my channel. But like at the end of the day, it's just like, who am I to say if this is entertaining or not? All right, thank you. This comes in line of something interesting I kind of read. It's coming in lines of something even I came in lines of like understanding when you're talking about the beginning of concept of chess. You are able to get your king out of the center. In lines, if it gets in the way of the rooks and it's vulnerable to central attacks. If you're able to get a rook to the center, defend key central pawns or find activity for open central files. Generally, the open file in the center is supposed to get a decent amount of control, but it also puts down the vulnerability of the king. Amateurs tend to put off castling or avoid it altogether. Or generally it's said that they don't think too much about castling. But this can be a mistake. Now, it is contextual. I know a lot of players tend to castle too quickly, but for people starting out the game and who feel like they're very pressured in playing chess, castling to safety early on as possible is a good way of like optimizing focus on the board in different ways. Guess it can be done. You can also the impression was talking about the impression of delaying your castling if your center is closed, because people won't be able to hit you to vulnerability. So like whenever your king's in vulnerable spots, they can take advantage of a good tactic to be able to like capture pieces in to their advantage. So this is the concept of like moving your queen out too early. Generally, moving her too early puts and getting her in positions where people are developing the pieces and puts the queen into places where they are forced to move it, delays your development. So most people would not rush developing your queen unless you've have some familiarity with the game. Starting out a development, normally it is easier to not put your such an important piece out on the board too much in the open, and use it later on aggressively. Fianchettos, an Italian word and means on the flank. Fianchetto has some personal attachments for me, given the implication ongoing memes, and also in portions of tactics that I actually thought was pretty fun. Starting out watching chess and looking at tactics from watching the great Nakamura play, and I would see him double fianchetto often in openings to play. I also see on streamers like in relation to you could say a point source. It was kind of like from one chess streamer kind of optimizing across, seeing her play onwards to other influencers. I think this one's a caster again for internet chess popularity through Twitch channels when they were trying to peak during the period when Pog chats maybe a bit popularity on some displays for people watching chess online. Fianchetto, a girl named Fianchetto, lines of that. So I take some sentimental attachment of using this tactic in relation to this. Larson's opening, funny enough, is a early extension of an early Fianchetto from the left side, I think. The red tea opening I can visualize also by its predictable exchange. It looks like a King's Indian, kind of like on implication. Knight moving first, and then having a pawn move forward was along with the bishop forming that the Fianchetto side. Oh no, the King Indian's defense is actually from pawn moving forward. It was a knight coming forward, and then oh yeah, sorry, but it's the red tea is kind of similar to the King is Indian from my perspective of things. This goes without saying, but the Caro-Kann is a positional advantage for maneuvering, or people are trying to get comfortable with things. Now e4 is normally the starting for any beginning chess player, but people also want people to get comfortable with a d4 opening, leading transitioning from the king Indian's defense. For long bouts of positional moving. So like these are very defensive styles, and they are openings that will force you to find ways to develop and probably have longer chess games. Yeah, so I started with Carcon, and starting out, they say it's generally a good place where you feel comfortable playing as black for positional advantages. I haven't really stick to the Carcon. The Italian became more of my staple, having a natural progression from like the Scotch to moving on to the Italian to moving on from the Scotch Gambit and then the Stratford. So that's kind of explain if you check my channel. Just like playing out with different openings, having one base structure, playing with one opening and keeping up with it. It's a good way of feeling familiar when you're playing on the chessboard. I guess I kind of point of like interest because it's talking about the Albion counter gambit. It's like centralizing control from the black side of the center, and then let it capture. But rather than capturing their pawn, you let them control. You let them progress for the point of getting more central control with that pawn that you place behind the queen. So having control of the d file by progressing your pawn at the sacrifice of a piece. The implication of a gambit generally. So like when you expressively say that, basically the idea is just like you've lost a pawn for positional advantage for this kind of gambit. I don't see the advantage of this. You could go more depth in talking about the Albion counter gambit, if whether or not it has opportunities to like offer better tactics. This is a good thing about learning it when opening, is you familiarize with particular tricks and trades from those tactics. I have to revisit the openings that I've kind of rehearsed. Yes, speak the Italian for that respective on lines of like a positional gameplay. I mean, I already done one in my previous game playing online, but yeah, I mean it's basically that, you know. I just kind of like if I express this opening sequence, if I like the positional advantage from it, and it doesn't offer that much advantages. You could try to win with it if you're a really good chess player and you're comfortable tactics. So the great Alexander Alekhine, popularized in 1921, analyzed as early as 1819. Shit, that's like 40 years by Alcuin Defense. So Alekhine, so someone called Alexander Alekhine popularized Algair's technique of playing the Alekhine defense in a hypermodern opening in every sense of the word. Immediate attack on e4 after e4 knight f6, and yours the general wisdom that recommends building a strong pawn center. Instead, black is willing to lose time and effort to go the white pawn down the board. Are these events pawns strong or weak? I gotta make a huge appreciation of it being able to visualize notation, which was one of the big things I was struggling when I bought this book. For trying on the recommended source of don't move it until you see it. And that would be from the reference of like Hannah Slice's channel in lines with, I forgot who it was, some Australian guy that was developing these formats to help with people develop their mental chess prowess. But like I could see the efforts of me having an easier time visualizing notations that I read on chess, which might be a bit old school. But I guess that kind of makes me feel a huge sense of satisfaction in terms of like that thing actually helped me make it easier to understand this book, and it gives me a sense of like appreciation for recall now the difficulty of why I was trying to get into this book. Just lines of the opening talking about the Banco Gambit, and there are kind of describing some tactical positional advantages, but like from a standpoint of like what you call descriptive knowledge on advantages and positional key squares that you want to emphasize for the opening. So it's actually really in depth in terms of like understanding. And I don't know, the problem is this Banco Gambit, so I was just like, I'm not gonna make the effort to learn that. It's not in my repertoire, but I can appreciate they give you a lot of details for this, and it's a point where I kind of have to visualize it.
So my mental memorization chess isn't so good that I can be able to like visualize this easily without putting extra effort. But I don't feel the need since I don't really want to learn the Banco Gambit. This book offers tricks of if you're playing outside, always make sure that you're facing the sun when you're playing the chess. So if you make a blunder, you can always blame the sunlight for causing a vision and obstruction when you're playing. Remember, play in the sunlight with the sun facing you. That way you've got something in your repertoire if something goes wrong. So, this now comes into the lines of the reverse London system. There's a lot of terminology. I was trying to see if I could like mentally visualize it, and generally it's a very defensive position. I'm looking at it and I'm just like, well, it's kind of like the format is weird. I'm just looking at the boring system that restricts enemy counterplay from a Sicilian opening. And I'm just like against defense, sorry, and I'm just looking at it, and I'm having a hard time visualizing it. Like from one display from it, it's not really worth for me visualizing it too much, but from what I can see, it's just generally, the queen keeps getting invulnerable positions, which causes the white because white keeps making move for development, and causes the queen to having to retreat and move the queen all the time. So generally, I think that was the idea from the black side, who's playing the king Indian defense, and this reverse London system just basically prevents any potential aggressive plays that the queen can do.
Across terminology in this book that just is weird. Knight B D7. So the impression was just like, why is there 2 letters and before the number notation from where the knight is supposed to move? This is the point where I just don't get. These parts are like in bold, maybe to emphasize some form of positional play from the terminology written, but like in my head I'm just like, what does this imply? If you move it from one piece to other, oh okay, I guess that's what it is. Knight from B or D7 from its position of potentially moving from right or left, and then it castles, and then rook E8. Okay, and 8C4 and whatever. It's a bit more advanced in terms of contextualizing and be able to visualize chess. I definitely feel again the intermediate step for what was used for well, I have to say, Hannah Seiss' sources from learning to pinpointing examples of corresponding to chess memorization has been a big impact towards the step of being able to get better notation. I recommend you do. Anyone that has that wants to get better at visualizing mental chess, that recommendation was I forget the Australian guy's name, but this was their source. Don't move it till you see it. It's pretty good and decent. I haven't practiced it more recently, but I am the incentive of playing against some kids may give me an opportunity to try something new and fun wisdom. So I'm looking forward to doing that this afternoon.
That's interesting aspects of showing you different formation of structures for opening, and then if I have to opt from one opening formation to another, so this Botnik formation looks decently placed, but really what's going to make me decide from one opening or another is how I like to play the tactics in it. Generally, if I read this book, and right now I have a really hard time conceptualizing it, but there are particular squares or weaknesses from these formations that are supposed to be used, or there's particular weaknesses and squares that needs to be identified, and that's generally the idea of playing and opening it and getting comfortable. Points, areas that are supposed to be weak or play into a position that's bad or that works against you. I'm just trying to, again, this book is kind of hard to conceptualize because it uses a lot of old notations to be able to figure out what's going on the board without you showing you. So it does involve a good portion of being able to memorize positions. I would, if you ever do the mental memorization chess and read this book, you'll have a better idea of conceptualizing. It's taking me time to go through it. So I'm seeing these openings and I'm just kind of seeing it, and
I'm getting the grasp of it, right? It is definitely a book that's difficult to pick up. You will not be able to read this as a beginner and think that you're going to be able to like comprehend everything that they're going to say. Yeah, I advise any beginners just to like play chess to a like an interesting level, whether you go for like classic or speed chess. Personally, I think young people would prefer speed chess, so rapid is a good way of starting. Then moving on, classic is just maybe you want to start playing the game for fun. I don't know. Personally, I don't think you should have too much time playing chess. You'll lose a lot of the enjoyment from seeing it. But if you're like a baby, classic chess kind of feels right. Having said that, the formats in FVD are classical, so it is an overemphasis of like mental chess. I guess it's just like how much time are you going to spend focusing, thinking of how you're going to win. The tactical advantage of it. Personally, I think speed chess is my personal preference of this. But if I have to emphasize in terms of like how Fury relates, does it favor like speed chess or classical chess? I feel like Fury translates easier in classical chess because you need to think more. But the transition from classical chess to speed chess is that much better, easier, because like you've got to build a good framework of memory. I'm not quite for go to Budapest Gambit. Again, I don't get the Budapest Gambit. I'm looking at it, I just don't get it. Just nothing in lines of making the play feel like it has some fun tactics to play around. And I'm looking at it and I'm just like, terminology is just like the lines played from one side, threatening knight d3 mate, knight d3. Okay, so let's check. When does the knight ever go into knight d3? Knight b d2, knight b d2, knight d2, knight. What the fuck does that mean? Knight b. Okay, yeah, knight d2. Oh, okay, it moves this formation, forces the bishop to come back down, and then the line follows from queen e7. Knight d3 mate. Knight d3 mate. Yeah, I guess I kind of see it. But then at the same time, I'm having a hard time visualizing it perfectly. Okay, so the queen goes here, it's pins, and then the knight goes to d3, and if he captures that, why does that force as a mate? Because it's pinned, and queen captures here. This formula. Sorry, this is tactic I'm trying to visualize. I'm having a hard time imagining it from the board, but it gives you a impression of a smothered mate from the play lines from the Budapest Gambit. But like some of these strategies that they describe, the opponent has to play in a certain way for it to visualize. But the end result of the tactic is beautiful. Watching it is very satisfying. But then they have to play the lines as you're expecting them. That's not what's going to be the case when you play live chess, like without being too what's it called, too disappointing. Does that make sense? You could say this is why chess can be seen as a gentleman's game. But there's the difficulties of like expressing that in live game formats. I don't recommend this book for people getting into chess at the start, unfortunately. And the direction where modern chess is in terms of like where it is, since I don't really go into the professional chess scene, that much, I would say it's kind of like closed doors there for me. Not really accessible to me to get a good feel of the community it's like. But like I really wanted to read this to see if like I could get a grasp, because I like the way Daniel or GothamChess kind of like describes things when they're trying to like put perspective in like a commentary for like when they describe things in analysis. Generally I just want to get an idea of like the thought process of like when they're making a quote to something or reference I don't really get. Where is it coming from? The direction that I kind of get is like, for youth, accessibility to chess is no longer on the emphasis of like higher level GM players, but more like affiliation to a direction of like, do you like these influencers? Can you connect to what they're trying to refer to when they're talking about this kind of meme? Memes are kind of like a good proportion of like in terms of like interaction of the board pieces to gameplay. This is where I kind of take a stance of understanding descriptive terms. It's something that people can kind of put out jokes, you know, that's already been implied given the current circumstances of people that put out her name already in the community. But like, you know, that's kind of the perspective you gotta like hold off onwards. I mean, if you put it in a more psychiatric like, you know, if you cross into that was different terminology in placement, we're just really describing her thought process.
So for anyone talking about bringing out the queen too early, generally being a mistake for beginners. Now there's one opening. Now I've heard it from a different place, but it's called the center counter defense, or has a good reputation to be used by some world championship previously from Alakeen. Now that was already used because he has his own repertoire of opening officially used for controlling the center from Capablanca. And Larson, Rogers, and Anon. Anon used this as well, actually, and generally it's a Scandinavian, and it's a move from sacrificing a pawn and then bringing out the queen straight away out, and generally there's a lot of options from there. But for those who don't like putting out the Scandinavian defense because of knight f6, which generally puts the queen in jeopardy. Unfortunately, from this book, I can't really conceptualize if they're actually trying to like describe particular strategies within this opening. Videos probably explain it better, but I get the impression of like the stance is that this is a form of play that is strategized, which comes in lines of like, you know, they tell you something at the start, and then later on they kind of like deconstruct it.
Kind of just like reading for this book and like seeing opening lines just for fun, I guess. And she's like Benoni, and I'm just kind of getting a good grasp. Is like, what opening do I want to actually conceptualize and have fun? Looking at it, this is like more in lines of closed positions. So just Shizak Benoni. So if you like to play like a defensive style, closed position makes sense to me, right? You're not really going for the attack. I went for a more aggressive. I ended up preferring more aggressive play, but the aggressive gameplay does get seen through early on, starting with fried liver, obviously. If I like really recollect on like trying to understand playing chess, really. Yeah, so like the shoes like Benoni is just like, what's it called? Offers up more mid-game opportunities. I'm just trying to rationalize it, and just the page doesn't really elaborate on particular tactics that you may observe on tutorial videos in terms of like if they play a certain way. So that's that. But I guess I'm really trying to get a grasp of just like on what do I take out of this book from in terms of like how I'm going to orientate my style of chess gameplay, really, right? And I can't really say like under Repertoire on a first opening basis, right? Opening theory is quite easy to conceptualize on certain aspects when you're talking to when you're playing a player. If they're very familiar to facing something in a certain way, you know, like, do I have to explain it? Generally, the uncomfort of having a lot of pressure and pride in playing in someone who plays a bit differently makes them uncomfortable. These uncomfortable stances, whether it's timing, unfamiliar with board, or the patterns that they're used to seeing, it can catch out. I'd say like it catch out beginners to mid-game players. But I'm not sure. Like in terms of like changing up my opening, I stick with one, which was a recommendation for most videos, talking lines of like building your base from chess repertoires. and then I have opted to play other openings with some success from temporary basis, but like never really in a consistent basis, just playing for fun. I didn't really hardcore thinking about the rating too much, being aware that it didn't serve anything for me in terms of externalize. It externalize. It wouldn't offer any form of externalize. It didn't offer me anything. Basically, if I had a high rating or not, like it wouldn't stop me unless I were to enter competitions to ask you to have a certain rating requirement, right, or something like that. Having tried to grind before and then like letting that point go, but just keeping the game playing for like enjoyment, and was continuing to see if I could like make the appreciation, because I like that pressure I was feeling in chess and playing in different scenarios where I was trying to develop some pride from it and learning how to deal with the kind of emotional bias. Like if I have to explain it, I was just like at some point it was because I was building up a cumulative of cool games that I felt good about to make myself feel like I could still play this game even so my ratings is now going high. And then like if I didn't have a good time in the chess club, I'd like post 3 games of myself. It was good tactics that I kept. I'm like, this is my validation so I can play this game. Alright, so I'm just gonna come across after talking some things. The Dutch defense, coming down lines of it being familiar with it. I guess I want to kind of flesh it out. I have played it a few times, just looking for variation of what I was playing. And I think what I came across is that some ideology of its concept or formation somehow comes to a Stonewall variation. And what I wanted to express when I was reading this chapter was like Stonewall variations. I was just trying to see the picture and coming to understanding how I understand the Stonewall opening, right? Because I played a Stonewall, and looking that the Dutch kind of leads onto it. Well, the Dutch defense looks a bit different from what I recall. It's basing on chess.com, obviously, for intonation. It kind of looks like a... Yeah, it's slightly different from how I understand the Dutch. So the Dutch defense exists, but I don't think it's the actual opening in regards to this book. The book looks different from explanation. So where is this? This is 1998, so the early 2000s. You do have to be aware, like chess is kind of like a hobby outlet. So there's no like exam for chess unless you go for a what do you call rating for competitive chess with some regulated rules. So where I kind of take the externalization of it is that chess when they kind of like switch up terminology, it's kind of loosely done in the community, it was like without thinking there's too much gravity or consequences, because it's unless you're taking credit, or unless you're taking a variation that's credited to an actual person, then it's different, right? So it's the same idea of intellectual properties in lines of like taking something and giving it a twist or something like that. If you the Alekene opening, you were to take that and then call it yourself or do something, if you take it as source material to avoid disparity, you'd have to credit the source of where you've seen it. I mean, all of educational resources, the whole idea of copyright or like a referencing is a big thing. So like I would assume most people in educational settings have a certain respect of education about using work that's you've taken inspiration from or not. So yeah, I mean that's something I thought should feel ingrained in most people's capability to understand when they are kind of taking things in a lighter level or not. All right, so Stonewall variation. So this is where I'm kind of getting confused, because I used GothamChess sources to come in lines of like being a popular internet streamer and meme internet personality for chess, coming in lines of the Stonewall opening. look at it, they were talking about a square called the e5. Well, the white will try to dominate from knight d2. So I guess this variation from where the piece can be played. So like knight d2. From where does this go? D2. Yeah, okay, so that pawn gets captured and it goes there. So bb2. Okay. I gotta stop there. Generally, I was trying to like really get the idea because they were saying the weakness from the stall wall variation from this play is on e5, and I was trying to look at it just to see what is it exactly the piece is. It looks like they're trying to implicate a pawn fork coming in lines of it. Just going into theoretical parts of aspects if you were going to go in detail of it. I do play the Dutch defense, and there's this variation of it, and this is where I kind of could get on the understanding of like its terminology, right? So maybe it's a kind of like it's kind of like a tactic within the opening that gives a positional advantage that can be played on or what. So, and again, it's just like playing with your tools and rehearsing it to understand what you're doing. So this is the impression of remembering squares now. This opening, the English, apparently a square is an area where a sound answer to put a lot of your principal threats. White's lust for d5, makes his own overture towards d4. Yeah, both sides can then follow up with two basic plans. Now they kind of go into like explanation of like how the positional play can go there, and I don't need to go in that much detail. I kind of just get the idea of like I think I just saw a kind of like hint there, knowing particular squares of strength from weakness squares or positional strength squares from openings can be an advantage of what you keep in that line when you play around a certain tactic. For queen side b2, b7. So in the lines of the English versus the Sicilian, e5 is in fact a reverse Sicilian. Was the move black hits the d4 square. Okay, and it takes more space on the king side, which can lead to a position where white plays for the queen side while black strikes out against the enemy king. Knight c3, knight c6, g3, g6, g2, g7, knight f3, d4, d6. When white will expand on the queen side, rook b1, followed by b2, b4, b5. This loosely loosens g2, a8 diagonal for the g2 bishop and gains space and chases the black knight away from c6. Note that white prepares for b2, b4 and rook b1 instead at a3. Why? The tactical reason is that b2, b4 loosens g7. Okay, this one goes a bit more difficulty because again, this is a lot of like conceptualizing chess, which comes in lines of like some parts of memorization. So I have to kind of think about it. But the concept is in my head when I'm reading this and I'm trying to understand it when I'm actually trying to give a good explanation and transition. As I said, I really liked how Daniel and GothamChess at some point would describe certain things. I don't think they do it as often. It's not really necessary, but like they would actually go in depth in trying to explain something in terms of like positional advantages when they kind of explain particular parts of chess. If that makes sense. Yeah, this is just me expressing it because like I do play the English quite often. I made it kind of like a kind of gimmicky variation of it, not really a original open, but a variation of it. So it's not a new opening; it's a variation from the concept of when I was playing it in terms of like conceptualizing a strategy that comes in lines of something that a tactic that I wanted to like, I liked putting out there, which were the thin shadows, you know, lines of like when you normally, you know, it's like learning a script or like when you're going into competition, like you're learning someone's playbook or whatever preparation, you can prepare for it by like looking at weaknesses for particular theories that they might have studied and prepared for in proper chess formats, you know. So like that would be where I kind of like take a stance of like explaining something. It's just like knowing what a person's opening would play can offer weakness in the sense that people can prepare against it, because chess is a knowledge game, as most people will describe it for most part.
So there's an aspect that if I would share, just because we recommend lines of openings, and if you ever wanted to see a repertoire, I thought this was hilarious. The Larsen opening. This harmless looking opening, B3, wasn't given much respect until the great Danish grandmaster Bent Larsen, who jokingly called it the baby orangutan, began winning one game after another. Was it in the late 1960s to 1970s? Was B3 White prepares to place his bishop on the activate B2 to H8 diagonal. Look, he has a tactic too. This black taking the immediate spatial edge of the E5 or ED5. White hopes to chip away at the enemy center. Was his pieces was the BB2 and the knight F3. Was the spot of the C2, C4, and F2, F4. Oh, the center is strong overextended. That's what all this is battle is about. I have a normal sequence. The B3, E5, black the immediate grabs some center space. Spot. E3 and E5 black wants it all now. Now white must react aggressively or he will be overrun in the middle. Bishop B5 pinning the knight and renewing the threats against the bishop D6. And now it moves like F4. Risky since it weakens the position of the white's king. Oh, okay. Some of the more detailed lines of what's getting played, I'm not really conceptualizing too well. What you want to tell me? It's actually a bit hard to get that in my head properly. Okay, so bishop. Okay, I'll kind of like end this part because this does require you to like help visualize. I did say this is not really a book for beginners to like get an idea because terminology, but like they are describing certain possible formations. And I do want to emphasize as this book goes on, it's separating different parts from opening to mid game, emphasizing tactics and what was it now? Maneuvers. Ow, fuck. No, they were talking about tactics and oh shit, what was it talking about? Sorry, combination themes. That's the word I'm looking for. Combination themes from tactics to just different thing. I'm kind of like in the point of like fleshing some of this already out actually, and finally the end game being things that they talk about was an explanation of the end game tactics relates to certain things. So it has a lot of good. This is a really good book. It also gives you the psychological aspect in terms of like certain aspects of interpretation between people who like to flex in their own kind of like environment, the application of offering draws or not. So too many people are kind of afraid to lose, but we are all going to lose lots and lots of games. And if you play like a coward, I haven't seen a particular little red play out in regards to what was it, Karspaz mentality in the videos already been put out there. You get the impression of like this is her idea of like when she faced a GM. The following pointers are worth considering. Sit down and get excited about the prospect of learning something new. Accept a quick draw from your opponent at any rate won't allow you to learn anything. Playing into the board sterile. When a higher rated player offers you a draw, he either feels ill or feels he is in serious trouble. Look at his offer as a sign of weakness and play confident for a win. Never offer a draw. You can do this when you're a professional, but until that time, throw that option out of the window. If you're playing against a weak player, draws don't make any sense at all. Aren't you expected to beat this guy? Cowardness in the online community. They already have anonymity. Words get how you play until the bitter end. Everyone will start to fear you. In the price of the game. Now, there is a proper approach when you go in, volunteer words and information in regards to this. The correct way to offer a draw is to make your move. Say something like, I offer a draw, but then press the clock. This way you don't speak to your opponents in time and let them disturb it. Oh, okay. So the option's there. It's for them to take it. You're not pressurizing. You're not saying, draw, draw, draw! The impression, this is the implication of confidence on the chessboard. Make your move, and I'll consider it. An incorrect draw offer can't be retracted, and you have the right to accept it until you say no, or until you make your move. I say the word is like the confident player, again, is in control. Like putting up the options and seeing what was being taken. Whew, that was not the case from a recent video that I saw. Also conceptual idealization, especially in the deep depths of psychiatry and lines of like where people maybe blunder, exhaustion. Not going too much depth, there are some interesting implication of jokes in terms of like not having enough snacks or food to keep you self-motivated, being distracted in the self-precision. I can tell you for anyone that's like gotten really attached to saying that they are good at this game in a more professional sense, it is definitely a game of concentration. There'll be days you play good, days you play bad. So distractions, a loss of concentrations. Apparently the key aspect here is like when a scene from Aliens enters your mind, its jaw clumps into your face. Your hand twitches and places your queen on square where it faces certain death. Very good idea, conceptualizing of a movie review I should go for next. Aliens, this is awesome. Those recurring patterns. Certain weaknesses may occur in your games over and over, and this is the idea of like formations and like weakness in squares, positional blunders that will always be apparent when you play this. The tactical motives and tactical blunders will turn up in an enormous number of games. In order to eradicate this kind of blunder, it's a good idea to collect your biggest mistakes and organize them. So like making notes of how you're playing and all that comes in lines of like figuring certain things out.
Okay, so shoot, what I was gonna do is this point just talk more about where I am in the book or covering it. See, I will try to finish it today. I'm a bit moody today, but you know, this is gonna happen for everyone. It's just normal. I can take it. So I'm going through the Queen's Gambit, the checkerboard system, and what interested me about listening to this is like it comes to the lines of like being able to understand playstyle. I think what I got really from this when I was reading it to be expressive is that black has 2 knights against 2 bishops. Normally this would favor bishops, but in the presence of position, white pawn, center, and bishop have a remarkable lack of activity. So I thought the impression of while I was reading this was that basically the exchange was that they remove bishops or remove knights or something in the game. Let me reread this just to be a bit sure. It goes to follow. Black goes all out for activity. The first bishop is happily moved from the board. Every move black plays is aggressive. Now black has 2 knights against 2 bishops. Okay, yeah, and this would favors the bishops. But in the presence of position, white's pawn center and the bishop shows a remarkable lack of activity. So the position is the advantage to the black, but that's what I understand. Normally bishops are better than knights in the general impression of what I'm getting. So the big deal about this checkerboard system is the fact that I guess it's just one way of like playing against Queen's Gambit. That's as much as I comprehend, if that's okay. But the main thing is it was founded by the Russian master Minchikorin in the preference of knights over bishops. So it's unusual. That's why it stands out to me, because I prefer bishops over knights. But you can still make it work, in that sense. So during that period of time, that's the impression I would get. I hope you don't mind me just like going through this some more. It's just like I figured I finished the book. It had its moments. I had to laugh at the Larson opening. So yeah. So the Queen's Gambit accepted. Again, this is a reply from the Queen's Gambit play. Many players who don't mind giving white a pre-pawn
preponderance of pawns in the center have found that the queen gambit accepted, but the opening for them Fischer in his 1992 returns to match versus Sparsky. Ooh, shit, Sparsky was alive and played against Fischer. Yo, that's a big deal. I don't even know, like Fischer, is like a saga. This is like, now I've actually seen it contextualized on YouTube. So I was like, shit, that's Sparsky. Sparsky faced Fischer? On context, right? So I think it's Sparsky. Oh no, it's Kasparz. I can't remember who Spassky is. Sorry, it's Kasparz. Sometimes the Russian names can be a bit different. So Sarah 1, Tim, and Anand? Shorts and a host of other world-class competitive have found that the opening d45, c4, d capture c4 mixes some classic solidity for central counterplay for quick active piece development. The negative side, Queen Gambit accepted is obvious. Black gives a valuable center pawn for less useful c4 pawns. This allows White to build a strong pawn center with the immediate e4. Alright. And if this doesn't appeal to him, he can proceed more slowly with e3. Nice f3 is another main line, often transposing into position reached by 3e3. After e4, Black must organize quick counterplay against White's center pawn with either knight f6, knight f6, c6, and let's say c5, or e5. These lines are complex, and Black has shown that fighting chances can be taken seriously indeed. Constraint e3 allows Black to demonstrate that he has no intention of trying to hold on to his pawn into a disaster. b5, a4, c6, a capture b5, c. Because this is hard for me to visualize generally their replies to like playing against the Queen's Gambit. In terms of like what it offers, it seems to be just opening up the files for counterplay. So like you can put where your development that side. That's as much as I got from this book, taking out in correspondence to Queen's Gambit. Maybe you meet someone else that's played a Queen's Gambit and a few times, give you a bit of insight when he puts his thought process of his strategies when it comes in lines of like favoring certain developments or not. You know, yeah, I do find that tendency as well after account learning and overlapping different openings. I tend to like prefer certain patterns when I'm playing a certain way. Coming back to what I thought was a Dutch, but I think it's conceptualized. This terminology was just passed on from chess.com, not exactly being sure this is how it's actually format is normally said. It's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect given the context that it's in a amateur game, but like most people should be able to recognize what you're trying to visualize when you make a reference to this or what so. So e capture d4, c, knight c6, knight c3. White's isolated d pawn gives him more space and kingside attack chances, but Black's control over the d5 and his potential to eventually create pressure against d4 keeps the game double edged. The examination of isolated pawns of g4 extremely valuable play wishing to try either side for complex opening. We might as well finish this because a good portion of like my meme Gambit, you gotta understand, it's just my approach of my development, just conceptualizing what Gambit is. You know, it's actually just a tactic, but like, you know, just like I took in references from watching the show and felt like a pretty cool thing at the moment. So like Queen Gambit's decline is kind of pushed down, so it's part of the virtually every world champion repertoire. d4, d5. It's like I laugh into people are pushing out saying it's part of the repertoire of decline. So d4, d5, and then c4 is placed, and placing pressure on the d5 and preparing to open up the c file was an eventual c capture d5. To e6, e6, e6. Okay. Black stands firm as centers and intends to develop harmoniously with knight f6 and be7. Yeah, okay. Bishop e7. Okay, so I'm trying to decide which square I'm going to go for relation to that. No, just okay. Yeah, sorry. It's nice. I think overlapping this read will also get me the idea of like doing mental chess. It's a good mental exercise. I gotta repeat. I do this just for the sake of saying that I like I like well, I'm in a period where I'm not it's nothing too obvious. So I was like, why not just try to like get a bit technical and look cool in this for some reason. It's like true problem black experience was the opening art of his blog. Okay. I mean, I did enjoy this. I can't tell you not the fact that recording your tactical games and keeping these games within you give you a strong sentimental attachment to chess, even if you're not always going to be performing the best way, or you can't flex during your rating or what's so, right? Because like it gives you a sense of like remembrance that you're able to like you still are able to like develop a good sense of like resilience in your skills for the fact that you have had games where you felt proud of and you're able to keep a record of it. You know, that's my kind of like ideology of just saving games that you've had good tactics on. If you want to keep a healthy attachment to the game, because they are still a game, it is still a game where it's kind of reflecting in lines of your self-esteem because you're able to find a good moves and outplay your opponent, which shows some intellectual kind of like what's the word called intellectual prowess, you know. um that's my ideology of like what I've done so far in my development and how I was able to keep healthy in the game, despite the fact that you can have rows where your performance is just absolutely and utterly shit. You can't get any ratings and you're just kind of grinding the ladder. But like I say to anyone, you know, if you're not making money from this or you're not pursuing a professional line in this direction, don't. But keep it in the more sense of a kind of like healthy attachment in the game to show off that you are capable, like to build up your self esteem in that direction. Yeah, I mean that's how I would kind of describe things, you know. So that's that. So let's talk about the Queen Gambit decline. So this thing I kind of came across. I also came across cross referencing Levy's courses on GothamChess in terms of the his online courses. He makes a popular kind of like positional adventures called the Tartar defense, which creates at least a partial solution. Knight c6, knight f6, uh, bishop g5. Yeah, okay. Knight f6, g6. The devil's kind of stance up here, and the pressure against d5. Okay. So 4b e7, bishop e7, 5 e3, and castle. That doesn't give me a great conceptualized idea of what they're trying to like express when they talk about this form of positional advantage or what's so, you know. Okay. I am not unable to like describe it too well. Maybe it's worth like highlighting that I look into this and getting a good idea. What do they mean by expressing calling itself a Tartar defense? So now I'm kind of coming across there's a Queen Gambit decline. The Tartar defense is actually now I give some context about it. It's named after a German grandmaster, and it believes to be the only correct way to play the Queen's Gambit against Queen's Gambit defense. Okay, well, let's kind of, I'm just going to kind of conceptualize again, talking about it. D4, D5, C4, E6. Okay, E6, I'm not really sure what they kind of refer to, but like, yeah. Knight C3, and C5, then C capture, D5. A capture d5. A capture d5. A capture d5. Knight f3. Black simply accepts the fact that he will get an isolated pawn. Eventually, expect full compensation in the form of active piece play, quick and easy development, and plenty of central space. Okay, I'm having problems kind of visualizing this. Give me a second. D45, C4, E6. Okay. E6 you're referring to a pawn push, but then it's just like where in lines is like common lines of the diagram. Knight C3 and then C5. Okay, capturing this knight C3 and knight C5. Knight capture d5. C capture d5. Okay, yeah. So C capture d5. A capture d5. And knight f3. Black happily accepts the fact that he will get an isolated pawn. Expect. So there's like a material advantage, but even if it's just minor. That's as much as I understand it. I probably have to visualize it. Probably make a note of it in terms of the Tarj defense. The white best set was discovered by Polish super grandmaster Jan Akiba Rubinstein. Knight c6, d3, followed by bishop g2 and castling. When a Ficchetto bishop help placement of d5. Put play share on d5. So d5, d5. Okay, so he puts pressures on a particular square and lines of this implication of the formation. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna take a break. I am a bit moody, so I'm just picking as I go on, and I think that's inevitable for me to feel that way right now. But I do think I'll try to finish this book if I have nothing else to do. I've got my medication today, so yeah. Sorry.
There are certain things that I find interesting in terms of variation when you call in terms of like sings. So like it seems to be overlapping when they talk about someone called the Chigorin variation. I thought the Chigorin was also used to describe another form of playstyle from an opening, particularly to like control certain squares or what. So the Chigorin NA5 or something like that. Most modern lines are rook e3, rook e8, beginning to give e5 with a lot of protection. Nine and knight b8. Swinging the knight around to d7, followed by the active placement of a light square bishop to b7. b7. Okay. I can't be 100% sure. I kind of understand. Just that for some reason this movement has some implications for the review of Lopez. No, that's it. So I want to kind of talk about the lines of like where you need to focus when you found an opening that fits for you. Does that make sense? And variations, I'm not going to go into detail when you go in lines of finding an opening that sits your playstyle, and then talking in lines of certain maneuvers that leads to a variation. Because that detail, I'm not going to go
I don't really get it myself at this stage, right? And I haven't practiced enough chess to go explore that. But that would be the next step for me in terms of looking for the opening that I've kind of like catered my attachments to, right? So the Sicilian, but I want to talk about the Sicilian. Now this is interesting because like obviously the Sicilian is popular black side opening from e4, and generally that's a very common opening starting. C5 being a different part of the position, but you know it holds a lot of different variation from it, from common Sicilian centers, from C5, D5, and E5 or F5, right? So it controls the center. That's the good portion of what I need you guys to like conceptualize in your head from where it is. It's a good opening that covers the center. What I was trying to come across when I was like explaining it, not so much the different variations, because there's quite a few I can see that I haven't conceptualized in my head. The Nightjorf, the Richard Ralzer variation, and the Sozin variation, but it comes in lines of the dreaded dragon, and this is what we kind of conceptualize what I'm talking about when I like watching Daniel or like Levy Rosman describe things when they were when I was learning through the material for chess, and it talks about some more weaknesses in squares, and files, opening files that you can like come and attack, right? Just going by the reading. This is an audio log. It's decently long. It's not like I'm trying to like hide anything or like it's a big deal. Like all these readings are kind of like exposure from my experience of things. And if you want to watch it, you want to watch it. If you don't want to listen to it, that's fine. I don't really think that's the opening I'm going for on the dark side gameplay, but it's the weakness on a d5 square. And I'm still trying to conceptualize why. And the h file from h4, h5, capture to the g6 pawn. The Sicilian actually has way more depth to it. And I remember Levy Rosman actually saying that the Sicilian is not really a beginner opening. But that's because he's making in common correspondence to the theory behind it and the depth of where you can kind of like, there's more theory to match in the aspects of the Sicilian. I'm reading this and I get the idea that there's more theoretical attachment to the Sicilian. Now you can learn the basic opening and that's okay, but you don't really know the potential of how you progress, so the development. So openings, fine, you understand a few sequence starting out. It's a development for the mid game because you have so many different options and you have so many ideas of knowing where your weak squares are, where your progressive tactics go on, and push forward in this opening. It's a lot of depth. I would have like to take this and like practice it individually. But this book gives a good flesh out idea of why the Sicilian can be complicated, if that makes sense. It also talks in lines of the Maroczy bind. Maroczy bind from the progression of the pawn from c4, controlling the c2 to c4 squares, I think. Is it? No, that's not right. It controls the squares from the opposite end from, what do you call B5 to D5. And what I like to say is just like, knight C2. What I like to say is in lines of where it comes in lines of it makes it the progression from d5 to b5 rather difficult, and apparently that's a good implication for a Sicilian advance starting out from c4 and those other squares relating to that. So it's an advance, but apparently black still has a countermeasure to fight the Maroxy idea. So the common sequence of the Maroxy bind is e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, capture c, capture d4, and knight capture d4, g6. Black usually plays 4 and 4 knight f6 there, forcing white to block the c pawn. Okay, that is a bit hard to conceptualize this part, and I do need to spend a bit more time thinking about it. So that's not easy. Definitely not that's easy. It does put you in lines of like people who use to read old chess books and visualize. The whole concept of backgammon maybe back in the old Queen's Gambit, if they were to like visualize chess and that from reading old school books, it is a bit difficult. It does require a decent amount of time spent playing the game and getting used to notations and imagining in your head. Domination d4 square by bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f3, a6, knight c3, knight g4, da 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 da. Let me talk about this as a part a bit later. It's just like it's still talking about the Sicilian. Yeah, the Sicilian is very complicated. I don't recommend anyone to just like really get a good grasp of the Sicilian at the start. I seem to be a bit obsessed in lines of something in control of the formation of the d4 square. Knight placement and the knights are the outposts basically for this d4 square. And yeah, I mean the domain of the d4 square is by bishop g7. So the progression of that formation is stated on the lines. Double-edged line has been refuted on many occasions, but reports of its depth have always been exaggerated. The black position turns out to be very resilient. Theoretically, white can't obtain more than a small edge thanks to its own control over the d5 square. That's with the pawns, and also for the Maroxy, Markarov formation. This is generally a good control of the center and trapping pieces possibly. Fighting for control, that's what it looks like. The dark square strategy initially is the bishop g7 and bishop e3. Knight f6, knight c3, knight g4, queen, capture g4, queen d1, knight e6, rook c1, now black can play quietly, d6, he can try a slightly more aggressive stance, was b6 followed by 11bb7, and he can go for the gusto, which is queen a5, from the opposite end. It is really hard to keep track of like as they are describing certain positional advantages from just the notation from here. From e5, events form of the dark square control. They do mark it as well. So c5, this position. Yeah, from the progression here, I'm glad you mark it because it's hard to like visualize from one set point of the board to the next point, and it's kind of helping me visualize in my head. Actually, that's a good exercise in lines of like memorization chess. Give it into different picture formats, and then see if you can follow through the description of the progression of the pieces. You know, so setting picture books. You know, start 5 moves in, give you another picture where you're able to follow all the story in between it. That would be a good idea, I think, for recommendation for memorization chess. Aside from what's already been recommended from the Hana Slice material. No, don't move it, you can see it. Which I feel like I want to dive into it and like probably do it during the summer or during the vacation. Position black controls over the c5, e5, and f4 square. So you see the squares that they're trying to identify as being under the control of the opponent. So like where it takes the lines, like, for me it's just like you can't position there well, and the thought process is kind of hard for me to like integrate. At the very least, it gives you a sign for like where you're developing your pieces and where you should stay clear of on those dark squares. If you develop your pieces there, you're likely going to lose the exchange in some way. I feel that's what's the implication of these square weaknesses that what we're trying to like push out. Okay. I can't tell you how much I want to express like the appreciation of what's been told in my first journey of like trying to pick out what opening I wanted to say and feeling threatening on listening to like what was taught from GothamChess in Lines of the Sicilian Defense, reading the chapter and the theoretical aspects and the development of what they want to highlight when you're playing to get an idea of like your development and all that. Reinforce the idea that the Sicilian is not a beginner opening. Definitely not for someone starting out chess in terms of its real depth. There's way more variations and theoretical aspects to it in terms of its in terms of the opening's development. Playing and putting the places there, but comprehension of like what you're playing behind the aspects of like basic tactical play for the Sicilian is different level. I can play the Sicilian and just do normal board progression and just have fun. But if you really want to dive into the theoretical to like translate to more consistent wins, the Sicilian's not beginner friendly.
So now we talk about lines of the Slav. So what I wanted to kind of establish it on its simplicity was the implication of when professional players come in lines of wanting to play with an open, having conceptualized the idea of like making something of a game fun to play with. A lot of it comes from its potential, its plasticity, and it comes in good direction of like when people can see potential development of systems, or the development of systems, which why I took in lines of understanding when I talk about the Slav. It's highlighted that the squares, as it was mentioned, when you really try to get a grasp of an opening to get to conceptualize of the theoretical transition, it is the E4 square that they want to emphasize, that the lines of being able to, for the black side, to be able to control. And I guess really what I wanted to pull out from this was that the reason why this opening spoke about was that it was rich. A rich opening was full of ideas and possibilities. It made it popular with strong players because they wanted to innovate and find ways that they could develop ways to find where I come in lines of understanding now are the systems developing in the formation of play, which is basically the idea of sticking to an opening to make it properly. So now we come in lines of the stone wall. I took an understanding of that, or I haven't played the stone wall a few times. Apparently this is also kind of conceptualized as a just Dutch defense, and there is certain things that kind of like take an understanding of. What was it that I wanted to pull out necessarily from this actually? Okay, so emphasis on the Stonewall, because I play a decent amount, having used some good strategies on it. It focused on the weak E4 square. So the E4 square is the highlight of being where you put the position. I actually do remember that it is the ideal square for the outposts, and if people don't familiarize it, then they leave that open for the opportunity to control the center. Yeah, it's not that bad actually. I put that. It's an easy default for me to kind of like get control, I guess, from the centerpiece. You would. I feel this is more in lines of like threatening players that are just not used to seeing, because it's not a structure that is very familiar, and it all comes on to like experiencing chess. Okay, it's a lot of like nostalgia reading on to certain aspects when we talk about the. Well, they say the two-knight defense on the black side, but it's basically based in Italian. And one of the things I just kind of like remember, like I was trying to learn theoretical chess in a better manner, it was the implication of the max lunge attack, analyzed in 1854. And generally, I think it's still a system doublet from this opening from the Italian. And in that regards, I feel like this is something I would explore if I'm like building up my repertoire from like where I was last off from, like trying to learn chess, and where I've developed my progress at this point, having practiced and tried to get decent at it. So it just has this nice flow to it, and it feels really good along the lines. The two-knight variation does offer some potential development strategies that I could take in lines, particularly from the base of where I'm at for my opening already. So I do like it, because it also comes in lines of saying, at the end, talking about the fried liver attack. It just feels great in terms of like really going to contextual aspects when I'm explaining my development in this game. I can say like going through this book, and one of the things I feel proud about is like working on this terminology leading on to the display of like, is this because I'm trying to do memorization chess to do blindfold chess? I can recognize the terminology to describe the Greek's gift for the classic bishop sacrifice in lines of what's been talked about. Apparently this is a concept strategy that was described by Greco's handbook, published in 1619 or something like that, for it's a chess's history. Explored here into the lines of the clearance sacrifice. Again, this is my audio blog, just talking lines of what they talk about, since we're at the mid-game point of this chapter, and I'm almost done this book, which I'm going to later on upload my content. The aspects of clearance sacrifice, forcing a check and then putting into position the king to be able to get a checkmate position, being very evident in this regard, in this direction that I see. So yeah, I think that's the main thing that I would want to like flesh out from this, what they're trying to explain at this point. Decoy is something really cool because it comes in lines to something I spotted against an IM when I was just like looking at tactics, and it's in the fourth position of like this is not the same thing, because the other one was like, kind of like a force check, a clearance sacrifice that would lead to a fork. This one is in lines of like placing the bishop, which looks like a free capture, but then leads on to the a forking and capturing of the clearance of the queen. This excited me and kind of wanted to explore that concept. It's not all the time you may see this evidently in the board when you're playing. I'd like to also now talk about this as a conceptual aspect of the mating net. So why this was funny, I found it really just like express it. So we indicate as much as possible, random checking gives you a feeling of control, it gives you a feeling of power, and it's completely wrong. Whoa, it says wrong. No. This is not the way for it. This is why the windmill exists. It destroys all the pieces, so he keeps getting checked. He's just like, end the game. No. So this goes against my favorite tactic, but the general concept of the mating net, it's lines of like putting the king in vulnerable positions to the point where you can kind of catch it, to the point where you're kind of trapped into good positions for like first line play. Generally they want to try to this is kind of vocalized to say a mating net. So basically
you prevent the king from running away. Now, a lot of people can be considered kings these days, so this is a great tactic to like show them you're stuck. There's something to conceptualize talking about the Anastasia made lines of like combining the rook and the knight to make the gameplay in a very close positioning opening file. There's not too much patterns to say that the coming lines for a realistic game where that is super practical, but the idea is just using certain pieces to like finalize and get the checkmate completed. Interesting enough. Back rank mate is kind of like a classic one from my experience of starting out with puzzles to kind of get the idea of how to like checkmate the king. This part of the book kind of like lets you conceptualize some patterns that you can use towards checkmating a trapped king. So there's less hesitation about doing a sacrificial play, such as the queen. The checkmate pattern is simple of bishops controlling the file was a blockage on the other side of the king, from the bottom's mate to the backburn. And so there are different mate patterns that's discovered by these GMs a certain period of time. So from one being from the one of the lines coming up talking about 1869 from the diagram placed in the 148 and corresponding to the black side mating in 2 moves. The checkmate patterns is very hilarious. Greco's mate, basically he saw the opportunity to checkmate. What he did instead was sack the queen, and then saw the pattern, saw the pattern opportunity for a spummer mate and just went for it. So these mate implications are plays down to just some like stop ones. This is funny because like again, I already seen this before, the legal mate or legal mate, and apparently it was founded and recorded in 1750, and it gave the concept like kind of like grasp from this part of the book at this point of like generally it's mating patterns, which can talk about certain lines like in Vienna 1911, the Repertoire Tower from the Blitz game kind of appeared, and it basically you can basically the impression is it's like there are forced checkmates where the king has to move, and it's pretty decent. So it's queen d1 forcing the king to capture it, bishop g5, and forces the king to get the play from 2 discovered check, so double checked, and then finally putting the rook into the play from the d1 file, finishing the game. So mating patterns are another thing that's conceptualized that you can talk about in the theoretical analysis. So I like now to talk another concept of this book that's quite funny, the implication of untuned pieces. So you can find yourself in a suffering when you have a piece that may have some value in pointage, in value, but because it is stuck between certain pieces, for example, page 182 in diagram 183, the bishop and the pawn, the rook is entombed and is not able to play activity on the board. Yes, NT, 1 second. So like I want to say, there's a good chapter here that makes me laugh, and it comes down to like material advantage chapter, and it comes down to talking about page 188 to 99. You can make a use of a force if you need to do so. So the white has a piece for 2 pawns out, but the extra knight is not doing anything on b1. So bring the piece bring the beast back into play from knight b1, d2, f1, e3, d5. Once the knight reaches the d5 square, then the game will virtually be decided. The implication is like send the knight on a sentimental journey. Another take of how the knight moves. Which is quite funny. So we come now time to talk about another section called the minority attack. And really what I want people to understand is the concept of this chapter, where they want to elaborate. Just a great way of, like, in your thought process when you're going to play a game. There'll be times when you are in a position where you're losing the advantage. Does that make sense? So generally, some people like to put the attack implications of opening rook files, I think, into the enemy position. But generally, this is for a minority attack. So they're saying bringing out the rook early can do that kind of conception of being able to attack the lines. However, I will give you a strong point to tell you that on the defending side, you must decide whether you will be a masochist. So on the side of the goal, if you're at a material disadvantage, you will either play passively and just try to draw a long, painfully game. That is not really the impression of what is manly, in my opinion. The leader of men, so they said this is the goal of the defending side for the 1B. Whip up a counterattack against the enemy king. If you're in favor of plan 1B, and as already you decide to go for the throat, the following point might prove useful. Seeing diagram 194 and 195. Schematics here. I guess they imply from the king side, right? So attacking the king side. Avoid unnecessary exchanges. Retain as many attacking pieces, because generally the more materials that you have in a position where you're losing, the more chances you can force a mistake. That's the impression they want you to get when you're attacking on the goal of the defending side. The G2 and H2 squares are your main target, and generally this is the king side attack when they're going for it. And finally, bring a knight into the H4 position. Again, this is ideally generally the impression of, like, attacking on the king side when most people will be castling in the position. And then I like to highlight at this chapter, they'll say 1B on the 4th point. You can bring a rook into the attack via the rook A8, D8, D6, G6, or H6 position. Generally, they're trying to tell you using a rook and moving it from different lines, yeah? And where I take a stance is this is the backside attack. Well, this is interpretation at the time that it's written. How much analytical language it's used in that regard may not be the case, but generally they're saying they were putting expectation of the 1B, and the 1B plan was the subheadings in relation to the chapter relating to the minority attack. These rook maneuvers have the double point of attacking the enemy king and defending the c6 at the same time. When clearly ahead of the queen side, the black must react sharply on the other wing. Knight h4 puts white under the instant pressure. One example of the rook fe1 and h3, black continues to strike against g2, etc., etc. This conceptualization of, like, where you talk about the formation line isn't really well elaborated for me. So I'd say you probably need to conceptualize chess a bit better to understand the language at this point. I like to also elaborate the book also because a good stem of, like, recommendations for other books in layers of certain aspects such as the minor pieces. But, like, what I want just people to understand, I believe most of these influences are probably in America, from GMs taking note to taking stance of recommending their strategy books and ways of thinking, as talking about minor piece moves won't enable you to use them in a proper way. To do this knows that what pot structures favor bishops or the advantage of a knight overall, all the other men, what to play for and what to avoid, or etc., etc. I like in terms of, like, highlighting, since this does come in line of, like, I mean, this book is from LA, so I'm just gonna say an active bishop, as we've talked about, a good bishop and a bad bishop being the goal system. An active simply means that it serves an active function. Here we have a highlight of a picture of a bad but active bishop. chapter is funny because it talks about the laws of the bishops, right? And generally, this is why I was talking about the diagram explaining a bad but active bishop. But there's also another one. They want to conceptualize a bad bishop, and generally, what they want to tell you is that make it good by moving the central pawns off the color of your bishop, blocking it. I'm also now reading this with some guilty pleasure of interpretation. So like laws of knights, right? So knights are the only piece that have the ability to jump over other men. This makes them a very effective in closed positions, but vulnerable to bishop insertion with no support points and a wide open diagonal. Knights said that the best way to beat knights was to take away all their advanced support points. If you want to make them effective, you gotta try to the following positions for your horses. Knights need advanced support points. They are going to compete successfully with bishops. A support point on the 6th rank is ideal, while a knight on the 5th is usually better than a bishop. A knight on the 4th is a very strong piece, but it gets weaker as it gets pushed back to the 1st rank. The 1st and 2nd rank are not good homes for a knight, and should be used as a path to greener pastures. The horse dominates the game from its 6th rank perch. Knights tend to be superior to bishops in closed positions. A wall of pawns will completely shut a bishop down, true, but a knight will jump over its wall and continue on its way. White Knights in 209 is flexible and happy. It will dominate the game at knight d3. Oh shit, f2. Knight d3, f2. Okay, yeah, and then e4. E4. Damn. I see. Yeah, I see. Where its eyes the d6 pawn. Damn, okay. Blocks black's passes and helps white's king-size majority events. Okay, I see. So it's avoiding vulnerable positions and captures from the back rank, putting threats in its outposts to the king's position. So it also sees majority events and envisions possibilities. So it's able to, I think the word is, it's able to pre-move, and it seems effectively so on looking up on weakness points on the back side. Generally, this is how it's described. Knights are the best blockagers of passed pawns. A knight can stop an enemy passer in its track and still remain active due to its ability to jump over other units. Alright, shit, that's some fancy words here. Diagram 210 relates to implications of that. White bishops is blocking black's passed pawn, but it virtually has no activity or scope. On the other hand, black knight is not only blocking white's passed pawn, it is also taking the enemy's pawn in the e4 and c4 file, the square. After bishop c2, oh, I see, yeah. Defending the e4 square. Queen f4. Black's queen will penetrate into the enemy's position and cause white all sorts of positional issues. Okay, this is on the king's side attack, okay. So knights are usually superior to bishops in endings with pawns on only one side of the board. Such a position makes light of bishop's long-range powers. While the knight's ability to go to either color, a bishop is forever stuck on one color complex, becomes extremely valuable, generally in the way the pieces move. So the knight has options where it can jump on different squares, making it vastly superior to the bishop. In diagram 211, all the white pieces are immune from attack by the enemy bishop. However, black pieces can easily be reached by the knight. Knight d5, c7, b5, e6, capture d4, d4 position. Okay.
picks up the d4 pawn, generally. The bigger implication of what I try to understand, what they're trying to tell you of the laws of knights, is that they are able to sink ahead and get over positions. Their pawns, bishops are blocked in a very straightforward pattern. We also come in lines of double bishop endgames, as they are the only way to endgame in different ways. The idea of the bishop's flaws being that they are stuck and confined in the color squared of the game that they are playing. White play and so they have potentially long range distance abilities. I guess this is what is kind of implied for the potential of two bishop endgames. We're talking about endgame potential. Two knights generally. Generally, the problem with two knights working together is they don't work well together. They don't complement each other's abilities because they don't really cover each other's weaknesses. The fact that a king and two bishops versus a lone king is an easy checkmate, while a king and two knights versus a lone king is only draws, speaks volume about the working relationship. I like to point out that two knight endgames are actually indeed possible, but two knight endgames without any enemy pieces means that a long king only ends in a draw, which is not possible for the case. So that's why the impression of a two knight endgame come in line that it's only possible when it is the king by himself. So two knights can be kicked around. I say that's the best way of explaining it. I mean, technically, whenever you only have two knights and a king, then the formation is impossible to find that endgame. Now, the hardest endgame of them all, generally where we come across, and only some of the best players do this on a very high level, being a skill that you don't really need to do, but if you do it, it's actually huge cool points, is the bishop and knight endgame. I've seen it, and I know it's just not obvious to do that when those are the only pieces left. It's actually really, really hard to do. And no, I don't really know how to say has the ability to police squares on both colors. I guess this is the best way of describing it in a way that's very jokingly funny. A two knight endgame mate is normally not possible, but I found a way. I'm such a smart guy. Another term coined. This is a different form of mid-game tactic, but it's coined by the name Manzovich, a German, probably high-level pro player in GM standards of chess. A mysterious rook moves refers to a move by a rook, of course, that doesn't make sense at first glance. It makes no threats and serves no obvious defensive function. A closer look, however, shows the move to either be prophylactic, page 265 to check out, prevent the opponent from making use of some plan or the idea he would like to use. A cell preparation for greater scheme. I see. Oh. So the prophylactic mysterious rook move plays itself into the position, and as less palanceful as it seems, it goes on. The example given is talking about Black's moves, Black employed by the hedgehog setup, which I have come across here in terms of its system. It is a common formation, and Black strives to break the white bind. It was easier to b6, b5, or d6, d5 by the mysterious rook fe8. So the rook rules on the 8th rank. The 8th rank. Black only defends e7 and frees the f8 square. like the knight f8 or bf8, but also add strength to the eventual d6 to d5, since a capture d5 would open the e file of the black rook. I believe that needed to be emphasized. The E file for the D5 operating spot. I don't know. In regard to this, it seems Alekhine's tactic in lines of pattern formation from the Alekhine gun tripling. This book likes to emphasize that the Alekhine was placed in the rear end, and it usually has been placed on the F file. White has taken complete control of the E file. The pin against the e7 knight immobilized the e8 rook on the horse, leaving black in a passive and completely helpless situation. I don't know. I've just thought the implication of an Alekhine gun tactic now makes sense to me in some form aware matter. So this comes out for another chapter file. Since there was a good banter here in relation to, again, Aaron Nimzovich back in 1920, was the first coined the term overprotection. This came in line of the strategic form of using the E file, the E5 file square that they were trying to protect in terms of weakness, using a pawn placed in there. Why, you understand that this pawn is very important. It virtually cuts the board in half and makes it difficult for black forces to come to the aid of their king. Yeah, sorry. Oh, the black king. Oh, shit. To accept the importance of this pawn, you can see that a white doesn't want black to be able to challenge it with the f7, f6 by overprotecting e5 as much as he has. No, that makes absolutely and utterly sense there. White dares black to play f7, f6. The reply e check f6 would suddenly unleash the full power of all white forces down the newly opened e file and along the newly opened f4 to be a diagonal fianchettos. Okay. That is a really huge mistake. Oh, if you do you use the never move the f6 file. A good attitude to have is generally in lines of talking about pawn center that has good control, and I don't think there's too much steady here, but like I do quote it just because I see that they're talking about already Alekhine and Nimzovich, claim that a pawn center could also be viewed as an object of attack. Now we know the owning of imposing pawn center is both a boon and a responsibility. The positive side of the pawn center is to restrict the enemy pieces. So generally, the responsibility of attacking a big center that seems destructible, which can be done by very high-level players, is to apply constant pressure against it by labeling it and giving weaknesses against its strength. You can see a potential strong way to attack the pawn center, which restricts movements from the board from the black side, on diagram 224 of page 232. This does come in line of playing against closed position. That comes in lines of like how to deal with the huge pawn chains. Having been familiar with having these kind of positions played before, recommendations always attack it from the base if you can find it. The relevance of pawn structures more comes in lines of the endgame potential. Generally, when most pieces are exchanged in a different manner, you see that there is a huge implication of where endgames are led, or even mid-game unexpected plays. Generally, I can talk about times when I've been taken off guard, where a pawn promotion forced me to be put into position from exchanges in a real-life game where I was just matching and playing against people for fun. I have to laugh at this one because it talks about double pawns. Double pawns can actually be an advantage. One, it opens up a file for its rooks. Second, if the pawns are central, they allow for coverage of critique squares. We talked about controlling the center. Double pawns in the center to restrict movement generally may imply healthy depictions of implications of controlling minor pieces being placed onto different positions.
I would like to also talk about the case of normally in double pawn's position, the lead double pawn turns out to be the target. You ever need to sacrifice. I do take a appreciation recognizing the stonewall variation of possible progression on the board, talking about the C file and the D file for controlling center and limiting movement pieces in the direction that I see. So I feel a good sense of memorizing this position for potential attacks, given the context that I normally play the stonewall in a manner that's progressively attacking the king side. This probably offers more substantiability of finding out better development in play, in farming, in looking at 237 diagram, page 246 in terms of its play. I know this is a bit of a running gag for past pawns, knowing that the theme has been used before in previous settings, but for my chess journey adventure of implication of a past pawn looking at puzzles thinking it was the computer system was cheating. But in reality, it is a bladed strategy coming down in saving time and a rule added to the actual format in chess for implications, where there's more cultural relevance to past pawns or not. There may be something underlying to that, but that's one of the many things I would kind of like externalize of expression in relation to the game. It seems to seem that most people have already taken the impression that triple pawns have no redeeming values in themselves, and if you don't have some form of compensation for them, an attack, a material advantage, or extremely active pieces, your game will almost certainly take a downward turn. That should be understandable at this point, what it means. So I haven't read this book, but I was curious about the implication of prophylaxis play, which was a term coined by Nimovich and refers to a move of strategy that stops the opponent from undertaking some type of action or plan. Prophylactic play can be very subtle and brutally straightforward. The position of the following diagram gives a taste of both. Surprisingly, it contains some subtlety. So I'm just kind of giving the ideas, just can I spot the implication of the attack that they're looking at? Yes, I can. Onward. Yes, I can. While I had substantial advantage in space and piece activity, I see the attack that they're looking for and what they need to do to be able to get rid of it, basically. Okay, so usually black tries to freeze themselves of this position where he's the e6, e5 square. Okay, yeah, so moving forward for the pawn structure, or c6, c5. Which has already been clamped down to the e5 square. Okay. And they made this advance impossible. However, black is about to play c6, x5, and a move that gains space hits the white center and activates the b7 bishop. The loose b7 h1 diagram can prove annoying to be the first player. I believe another way of seeing it is a simple the simple what you call h4 or a4, h5 or a5 play against the potential format of the Indian line, the Italian, right? On implications if you were to expect of a certain attack, or the bishop open if you want to go on a certain wavelength of things. Nimovich also implied the idea of 1900 restrictive strategies called restriction. Here we see the common scenario of the King's Indian's defense. Okay, yeah, maneuvers like nc3, d1, and e3, potential maneuvers. This event also undermines the black pawns on e4, and gains quite a bit of kingside space. Blast most the movement of white's g pawn and try to contemplate the g file. His correct plans of one knight f6.
for the g4 square or h3, h5 when queen d8. e8 or g6. Creates a real clamp on the g4 square. I can't really say. I just guess the understanding that there's something called exchange that we're talking about. This kind of takes attention to like what I'm trying to understand, like endgame odds. This is a very useful thing since now your opponent can't exchange pieces in the usual manner. Arwen's endgame odds continue to play a win in the middle game by creating advantage and structure. They wanted to give an example. I see something that looks like an orientation of a Sicilian between two B-class players. And a pawn is up for nothing and now decides that he will win the game if he trades all pieces, ignoring his positional trumps. White broke the first rule, never trade a good piece for a poor one, snatched the knight on f3 of f6 on the expected fianchetto for dragon, I believe. It checks the king, but it obviously bd3 was going to happen, and that's the position in lines of positioning the bishop. I feel they kind of skipped the part that when they were going to capture the knight, obviously using the queen and the bishop here. So let's see what they kind of explain here. So I guess this example was like the implication of like one move done, another move could have been done better from the like announcer standpoint, but it's an equal exchange, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But like what it offers is that generally the concept is like maybe keeping more pieces on the board may complicate the expectations so that your opponent makes more mistakes. So I think what I understood was like an easy check was seen, but the exchange material was the same. But the impression of like I think of a higher understanding is up to you, honestly. But like I'd say is like development would have been better. I think that's what I understood on the counteration of like this game being annotated. I'm not really at the stage where I'm looking to make memorization chess, but the description of pawn majorities and also pass pawns come in line of like being a good way of like annotating how to like describe something, and can you imagine the progression for its end game. It does give me incentive to like think about ideas of like progression of when I start trying to do exercise for memorization chess. At this point, it's just like I could kind of do some development, and I've already foreseen some weakness, but it is hard to like see the whole board in progression. So I have very limited access to how much I can do memorization chess, if I have to be very honest in terms of just trying this out. But I will be making a content. I hope that will be fun for people to watch and get an annotation idea of its potential. I love the figurative idea of anybody who plays chess probably understands that the description is the implication of like all pawns are baby queens that dream of reaching maturity. Under promotion, the act of turning the pawn into something else other than queen usually comes in a situation where the opponent will threaten a fork, a screw, or a mate. So it's a tactical decision. But you could see all your pawns as baby possible queens, which is kind of funny if you have to see it in terms of its value. But teamwork effort, they do like to emphasize that the implication queens and knights tend to work better together than queens and a bishop, because queens and bishops have the same abilities. Generally, I think what the profession is, people prefer queens working with knights because they have different powers, and these differences often are quite complementary. Over conceptualization, I'm just going to say the implication of a stalemate. Stalemate is a god's way of punishing overconfidence. We like to talk about draws. Stalemate is the implication of having the overseeing power and missing the opportunity to win the game, which is a tactical insight or intelligence from the opponent on the losing side. Be very appreciative of the word stalemate, because it's a position where the opponent had lost all his pieces but still managed to find a way to say that he didn't lose. I have to laugh at this tactical implication. It's opposition. When two kings move on one side,
when a person uses a king, then to force a positional advantage compared to the other king, it's called opposition. Both king would like to advance, but they are placed in a way that prevents a counterpart from doing so. And in this strategy is designed to have the move, since you must give up control of one of the critical X squares and allow the enemy king to advance. It is about you could see white move. So I'm familiar with that when I was coming into the impression of understanding, learning puzzle, the concept of opposition. I thought I put this snippet because it's kind of funny anyways. Triangulation is a big word that makes chess players seem like geniuses. An example, I like to go to the Laker games, but tonight I need to make a detailed study of the triangulation. The truth is that it stands out a very simple thing. A device that allows you to fight the opposition. Triangle calls for you to step to the side with your king before coming forward. This tempo-wasting maneuver turns the move over to the enemy and the opposition over to you. White wins in all lines. White would win if it were black to move king e5, king e3. Yeah, so I see the opposition already. White to move calls for a silver approach, so it's now king e3. Allows black to take opposition. Yeah, king e5 to shoot. Okay.
So we talk about now the Philidor position. The Philidor position essentially is when there's a rook and a pawn versus a rook and a king endgame, and generally the function of this play is to prevent the king to progress on the 6th file. So the key word is the rook is placed on the 6th file to prevent it from ever progress. So the key move is rook g6 draw. The key move, white king is deprived of access of the 6th rank. Rook h7 check, king e8, and just like the king is in king and pawn versus king position, it is always a good idea to keep a straight back from the pawn. Now we can see the point of rook g6. That's usually just enough for what we're trying to tell you. White king is on its take forward, and then e3, pushing out the pawn out, give it its potential for its progression. Otherwise, black would endlessly move its rook back and forth along with the rank and make a draw. Now white threatens to win, and king d6, rook g1, by activating rook only after the pawn is pushed.
Thank you for putting the effort to watch the effort I placed on making something of an entertaining video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said before, it's not forced, but like I really would appreciate any contribution and support you give to this channel, as it gives me more motivation and more incentive to enjoy more video creating and content creation. If you find that the content's drifts away at any point, you can always subscribe. It's no big deal. Again, it doesn't mean much. It doesn't take much from you, but it means a whole bunch of me. And it would feel great if you would just reward my efforts of trying to be, positive and contributionary. Thank you so much. Bye.